describe.
Popcorn therapy. Holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. This is a show where we take a dip, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, into the archetypes, symbols, mythologies, systems, and implications of whatever movie or TV show I am watching this week. Okay, so welcome back, everybody, to Popcorn Therapy. I am so happy to have back with me Natalie Rousseau, an old friend and a fellow witch, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. I'm unofficially calling this episode, or maybe this will turn into a series with you and me, Natalie, Witches on Witches, because we're going to be talking about I think the series is called Ehrenreich's Mayfair Witches, and it's a part of this immortal universe thing that they're creating. So there's like a couple of different shows that are connected based on books. So there's lots here that we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about this from our witchy perspectives. So, those of you that are just tuning in, I always assume everybody knows who I am and what I do, but maybe I should share. I'm a counseling therapist. I'm a tarot reader. I'm a writer. Lately, I've been diving deep into sort of ancient pre-patriarchal goddess stories, which has been really interesting. And I'm working on a project related to tarot right now as well. And I do identify as a witch, but for me, that doesn't mean it's not denominational in any way. So I don't consider myself a Wiccan or anything else that has like a name with a capital behind it. For me, the witchiness it means a few different things. I think foundationally what it means is I'm someone who wants to be in touch with my intuition and my relationship with the land, the people around me, the world around me, the moon, all of those things, as ways of knowing. So I feel like witches have wider ways of knowing, and we can use that in so many different kinds of ways. So that's my little intro to me. Natalie, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from?
I feel a lot of resonance with what you shared there. I love this wider ways of knowing. That's definitely my own interest in this, witchcraft, as it were. I also do identify as a witch. And that doesn't mean like I have business cards that say like witch on them, but I've just always really identified with more witchy ways, very non-denominational. Most of my witchcraft is practiced alone, though I also really love being together in community with others and celebrating at specific times of the year. But it is, as for me, witchcraft, really at the core of it is like deepening relationality. So deepening intimacy with myself. And that means the full capacities that I have, the great mystery that is me as well. And this relationship with like the numinous, with the natural world, with the cosmos, with the other than human kin that we share this world with, plants and ancestors. This is just endlessly fascinating to me, and it feels it just feels to me like remembrance. It feels ancient. It feels true. Yeah, and so that's just been a continual thread in my life since I was young. And I guess it really does show up like in my professional work. I have trouble these days describing like what it is I do. I don't have a simple way of describing myself. I often say kind of as a joke, I'm just your friendly neighborhood witch, I guess, because similar to you, I have this kind of eclectic career that I've created that includes a lot of time spent teaching embodiment practices, yoga and meditation, which is still part of what I do, not so much the yoga asana, but embodied mindfulness practices. I love teaching. I love practicing with people. I also work as a somatic inquiry practitioner, so relational somatic therapy and somatic parts work. I love working one-on-one with people in that way. And I have a whole component of my teaching work that is organized around supporting people in deepening their connection to the natural world, to the cosmos. So year-long programs that help people tune into the rhythms of the moon and the stars and the seasons, and building practices of personal ritual and self-reflection. So yeah, all that. That's why I love chatting with you, because there's so many points of intersection.
Yeah, we've had such a similar trajectory in creating the eclectic careers that we have, sort of coming through yoga, finding therapy sort of through that in a lot of ways, because I think we both had that noticing of, oh wow, the body and the mind are connected in these really intimate ways. And, you know, I think of myself as an empath witch, right? Or like healing is sort of a part of the witch work that I do. And I remember those experiences in yoga classes where, you know, you could feel someone's emotions sometimes coming off of their bodies. Or you could feel, you know, the way that the group in person together there would be some sort of energetic thing happening. You know, I would notice that certain themes that would come up, even if they weren't about, you know, the moon phase that day or whatever it is, a lot of people would be feeling similar things. There would be these synchronicities, around that connectedness. And I know we have sort of slightly different trainings and so on in the work that we do with counseling, but that relationality that you're talking about, I feel like is such a big part of it, that idea that I want to understand myself as a part of the web of everything, not just this sort of individual vacuum by myself, but that, you know, when I'm doing my healing work, and we're going to talk about this because I feel like it comes up in the show, it's that empathy of like, not just like, oh, I feel for you, but like I feel what you're feeling. Like it really, it's a much deeper kind of experience than maybe some people like either have access to or are open to, or, you know, however you want to describe it.
Yes to all that. Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the show a little bit. Okay, maybe I'll do a little recap. So I don't want to worry too much about spoilers here because I want to get into whatever we want to get into, and there are plenty of twists and turns. There's the second season just came out, and I haven't watched all of it yet, so I'm like a little bit into season 2, and there's still lots of unanswered questions and twists and turns and things like that, which is part of what I love about this show. But basically, the show is centered around Rowan, who has always felt that something was different about her. She has some sort of intuition about that difference. And throughout the course of the show, she discovers that she's a Mayfair, she's a witch, she's the 13th witch, she's a part of this prophecy. There's this, we'll talk about who Lasher is, but there's this entity that is deeply connected with the matriarchal line of the Mayfairs, that is maybe a part of her, maybe a parasite, maybe a demon, maybe a savior. Like, we're still trying to figure it out. And adventures ensue. So that's kind of what we're looking at here in the Mayfair Witches. So Natalie, why don't you just tell me whatever you want to tell me about, like, what did you think of the show? What are your sort of initial impressions? What were your reactions?
Yeah, well, first of all, I loved the invitation as soon as you invited me. I didn't know that they'd made a TV series of this. And I will say I read the books that she wrote originally, actually, at a time in my life when I was living off grid. So I lived off grid for a couple of years of my life in my very early 20s, and which was a very formative time in my life of, like, really, that's why I teach what I do around tracking the seasons and the moon, because when you live without electricity for a couple of years, it becomes so obvious the way these seasons and waxing and waning cycles affect you. And at that time, I had a library card, and I would just go to the library and get stacks of books and just read and read and read. And I remember inhaling these books at that time. And so it's really fun to circle back this many years later and see the way that they've been interpreted through this TV series. And I as well am making my way through the second series. And so there's still, I don't have the full picture entirely, but I thought that the way that you described that was perfect. Exactly. This matriarchal line, this fascinating family that traces back, over 300 years. And the witch, as it were, in each generation has a very special relationship with this entity, which throughout the series, the book and the show as well, they're trying to determine, what is this? Is it a ghost? Is it a devil? Is he a saint? Like, does he mean the family well? He helps this family to become very wealthy. and very successful in many ways. And he seems to be tied to their supernatural powers. They all have supernatural powers, at least the witches of each generation do to some degree. And part of that is described through their lineages, that, you know, it comes through their lines. There's a line of Scottish witches and French witches and all of that. But that also this entity, this character, Lasher as his name, is also tied to their supernatural powers. And but it's really he's really ambiguous throughout the story. You're really not sure if he's dangerous or not. So when I watched the show, there was that delight in coming back to a story that I knew from before. And of course, it's always really interesting to see the way people choose to translate a book into a show. And I will say that Anne Rice's book is hefty. It's 3 books, 3 big hefty books. Like I just listened on audiobook to the first one. It's over 50 hours of audio, you know. It's really in depth and really detailed. And she covers some really intense themes. Like this is not a light book, you know, like heavy with incest, every kind of incest you can imagine. And it contemplates really big topics around reproductive rights and abortion and stem cell research and things like that are really being worked with in that story. And then to see how the people that created the show decided to take those themes and kind of repurpose them for this moment. So I was really fascinated by that. And it's a bit of a horror show. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good with horror. I want to say, like, it's funny that I devoured these books when I was younger, and I can recognize that they have an element of horror. It's not, which is not what I read these days at all. And the show is definitely like leans into more the horror genre, and that's sometimes hard for me to take in visually. But so I have a mix of emotions. So that's where I'll start.
And from what I understand, from my perspective, so I didn't read the Anne Rice books. And I actually think I may have been, like, when Anne Rice was really big, I feel like I was just a little too young for them, where they were a little too scary for me. And I was devouring, you know, some of the slightly younger teen sort of versions of that stuff. But Anne Rice was like a little too grown up for me, like a little too woo. So I didn't get as much into those because they did seem like they were so intense, like Interview with the Vampire and everything. And, you know, part of the reason that I wanted to have this conversation with you is because I also grew up with, you know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where Willow is this incredible witch, and The Craft, which like remains one of my favorite movies, also horror, but sort of an interesting one about witchcraft. And there's sort of this cinematic history of portraying a witch. And I feel like, you know, you either get this evil witch that must be destroyed, or you get this very Sabrina the Teenage Witch, or Samantha in what's the one where she
Bewitched.
twinkles her nose?
Yeah, Bewitched.
What is it?
Bewitched.
Bewitched, yes, thank you. Yeah. It's just ridiculous, or it's like the superhero thing. And I feel like Mayfair Witches and also Agatha All Along, which I recommended to you too, I love that one. They started to feel a little closer to like, oh, actually I feel like there's some actual witches that are making these shows that are kind of leaning a little bit more into the reality of that side of things. So one thing I was curious to ask you is, especially because of the ambiguity of the show, who's evil, who's good? Like it's hard to tell, and I feel like the show really leans into the ambiguity, which I love. Like I just really appreciate a show that doesn't give you an easy answer, like it doesn't let you off the hook really easily in that way. And I was curious, not being a big Anne Rice person, do you have a sense that Anne Rice is like, was she a witch? Is she sympathetic to witches? Or is it one of these things of just like, ooh, witches are these horror story things, and like, let's do this horror book about these horrible, evil entities, right? Like, what do you get a sense of what her bias was?
Yeah, I mean, a bit. I mean, I don't want to speak like, you know, for her entirely, but I mean, there's published material about her own relationship to this. She's a really complex woman in her, and much of her writing in these series around the vampires and the witches and the supernatural and the devil, she writes a lot about the devil, were her own wrestling with her very strict Catholic upbringing, very, very strict, what she spoke about at times, very sexually repressive. and that's a huge thing in her books, is this like intense sexuality, and quite intense relationship with the occult. So her own working that stuff out through her fiction writing. And from what I know and understand, is she went through some real seasons in her own life, like where she was very distanced from her Catholic upbringing, and really leaning into this exploration of sexuality and the occult. And then she had a whole season, I can't remember if it was that she became born again or some other form, and she strongly rejected and actually like tried to like almost like erase what she had written, and became very tried to distance herself from that, and had very strong opinions about what was actually going on when she was writing that material. And then I think kind of circled back again. So I think she was a very complex person, working out a lot of complex themes, and certainly rereading these books right now, and knowing a little bit more about her full history. She's passed on now. I'm reading into it in that way, just like, oh wow, it's so fascinating the way writers work out their own, psychological material through fiction. And I think there's a lot of that happening. And again, she's working with a lot of themes that are very current at the time, and then using these stories as a way of exploring them, like reproductive rights. That's a very big part of the witch story.
That makes a lot of sense. As I was sitting with those questions, and sort of appreciating that the show would not land on an answer, and still hasn't in season 2, although I feel like it's still pretty ambiguous. Yeah. But so Carlotta is one of the, early on they call them the wicked aunts, I think. There's Carlotta and I forget the other one's name, but they're 2 sisters. And they are these evangelical Christian women who are, so strong about what they're doing. And I'm pretty sure Carlotta is the most evil of the characters, in my opinion. Like a lot of characters do some pretty evil things, but there's something so distasteful about Carlotta, who drugged Dierdre, who was the witch at the time, who had, it's called the designee. It's sort of like, it's the matriarch really of the family. And she would have been the one with the relationship with Lasher that should theoretically have given her a lot of power. And Carlotta drugs her, and basically that's how she kind of keeps the demon contained, I think, is by keeping Dierdre like wheelchair bound, basically, like can't move. Just wow, like the paralysis of that, the trap of that. And there's sort of this heartbreaking experience where, Dierdre finally gets free and she gets out with the help of this doctor, and she's murdered like a few days later, which, we may come back to because I'm still a little confused about why that happened. But, it really felt like Carlotta, and then she sort of tries to trap Lasher again and someone else and sort of kills an innocent person. And it's all very much in the name of God, which is something that maybe as a witch, as someone who's aware of the ancestral inheritance, I guess, of, having these people who were using the name of God to like torture and murder mostly women over centuries and get everybody on their side by using that rhetoric. It's like, that feels so evil, like Carlotta just feels so evil in a way that some of the others feel a little more natural. Even Cortland, I find less evil, even though he's done some pretty bad things. I feel like the little I heard about, he's much more evil in the books, but the casting of Harry Hamlin as Cortland is just so likable. And you get the sense that he's kind of, he's doing these, he's not crazy about doing these horrible things, but he's kind of doing them because he's either manipulated into it or he has to, or he's pressured in some way. Whereas Carlotta was so up on her high horse about what was right and wrong and didn't have any questions about murdering people in the name of her God, which is just, that's real. Like that's something that's existed many times in the world. So I found her, it's hard for me to see that as anything other than evil.
Yeah. First, I do so appreciate Anne Rice's ability to create these very ambiguous characters, and it's the same in her vampire series. And there are so many characters when you read them, if you read the Mayfair Witch books, that are so ambiguous all the way through to the end, and it's really hard to know. But Carlotta is a really definitely one that is, seems to be like people are unified in that she was quite distorted in her hatred of the entity of Lasher and what she was willing to do to protect the family. And so it allows the opportunity to explore, I think, two aspects of the ways that women and people who are um, different in the way that they experience the world have been oppressed. And one is, yeah, through the idea of the name of God, actually enacting terrible violence on women and other people who are different in the name of God. But the other is through um, institutions of like psychiatry and medical psychiatry, because that's a big part of it. Is like, and that's explored in the book, is how when the Mayfair witches kind of entered the modern world, how the damage that was done to a lot of them through the fields of psychology and modern psychiatry. And so I think they do a really good job of showing that, of these ways in which, um, yeah, again, often women have been really brutally bound through those means, through those institutions, and how twisted it is, as if like the psychiatric profession is doing healing work by giving them shock treat, because that's what happens to Deirdre in the story, like shock treatments to the extreme degree till she basically is gone, and then drugs, drugged to the hilt, and just is bound completely. And then there's the whole element of bringing God in. So it's quite dark, and it's also speaking to some real themes.
And, some of the history that I think the Mayfair Witches actually does pretty well is that a lot of witches who may not have named themselves as witches, but a lot of people who were accused of being witches were healers like Suzanne, their ancestor, who would have been midwives, or like counselors, which they didn't have a name for, but like, people who would have been, it might have been your midwife or your sort of like local village healer or whatever, where you would go to that person for emotional support as well as medical support. It would have been connected. And these are the people that ended up getting persecuted because they had that healing capacity. And then there's this whole history. There's a really interesting book called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses by Ehrenreich and I forget the other one's name. I can link it in the show notes. But it's all about how basically, from a patriarchal perspective, men essentially took over the medical industry, which was like women led and oriented for many years. Like only women did C-sections for a long, long time, because obviously these were the midwives. These were the ones that knew what they were doing, right? And the men came in and they were like, we have institutions now, and the institutions do not allow women to have these certifications, so we're the doctors now. And there's some great stuff in that book about how like these doctors would be like, oh, bloodletting and leeches, and like you get the venom of a black snake from underneath a rock on that hasn't seen the sunlight, and you use that elixir to like heal someone's overabundance of phlegm in there. Like it was just this wild, the sort of stuff that you would think of as like a sham witchcraft like spell, right? And they were doing all of this and saying that they were more qualified than these women who would have these gentler approaches that probably wouldn't kill you. So there's a whole history in that that healing work being twisted, in these ways. And it's interesting that you and I are both, we're not psychiatrists, but in the therapy healing field, like I feel very aware that there's also a history within psychiatry that has been so oppressive, not only to women, but many different groups of people for lots of different kinds of ways, in order to like shut people up or, make them get along or fit in society in these ways that hasn't, it definitely isn't even today, not always empowering for people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's really important that we reckon with that history. And we all are reckoning with it to a degree. And I think the collective sort of echo for women and people who are different in any way, I'm including queer folks here and people who are neurodivergent, there is that kind of instinctive knowing in the body, like I'm not always safe,
Yeah.
and I'm not always safe in these institutions, right? Like, I have to be very careful about how I approach spiritual communities and healing spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a moment where Carlotta says early on where you're still not sure, like Carlotta has good intentions. She's trying to protect these women from what she sees as a demon. And she says to somebody, it might even be Rowan, women in this family don't tend to have good endings. And later on, you're like, is that because you threw them off the balcony? Or because of the demon that was trying to give them power? And that's still not answered, right? Because like we learn a little bit about the ancestors in the first season, but it's like, okay, wait, where do these bad endings come from? Because it does seem that Lasher is there to empower these women. I think Lasher genuinely loves each of these women in his own way. And he does give them power. That scene when he rescues Suzanne from the witch hunters is like so touching to me. And so powerful, like definitely a savior in that moment. Right. And so you're like, okay, Carlotta, like what do you mean? Like what are these endings? Cause we know that she pretty much killed Dierdre's mom, and then she, imprisoned Dierdre with drugs and all of these other things. So who's creating these bad endings? Like, is it your fear of these women's power, or is it the power itself? Right?
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, I mean, I will just say from the series, like Carlotta is responsible for the death, or the early death and torture of at least 3 generations of the Mayfair witches. And yes, her intentions are good in a way. She's trying to like rid the family, but in the story she's actually a very powerful witch that has in a way trying to deny the type of witchcraft that exists within her family, and so she goes this other direction. Like in the story, she's a lawyer, right? So she becomes very like very interested in this other way of exerting power, and she uses her powers as a lawyer to bind the family, to bind these women and to have power over them, and actually makes their lives a true like living hell. But it's to the end. Wow. Even when she does die, you're just like okay, that's a very distorted way of expressing that intention. And I can imagine, again, there's a truth to that. I can think of probably so many women throughout time that have, I just think even in my own family, my well-meaning grandmother wanting me to be smaller and to cloak certain aspects of my femininity in order to keep me safe. But the way in which that was expressed was really quite harmful. It's just like this idea of like, keep your head down, don't get noticed, be really careful. That inside of that message was like women are not safe, but it gets distorted.
Absolutely. And it's fair. Like there's reasons why people feel that way. And, sometimes when I think about a witch too, I think about, what is a witch? It's a woman with power. And I think it can also be someone who pokes at the gender binary too, someone who's either trans or non-binary, or a man who has some feminine aspects or whatever it is, like someone who kind of pokes at the patriarchal rules a little bit. Right now we're in such an interesting moment, I think, politically around that happening. And it is interesting to kind of see, like, we can talk about the gender dynamics a little bit of this show as well. Because it's sort of like this terror of women having power. And part of that is sexualized, right? It's like a lot of the witch hunt stuff. It was this idea that these women are fornicating with the devil, which like they're kind of literally doing. If we think of Lasher as a devil, it's interesting how he goes through each generation of women and he has a sexual relationship with all of them, and then somehow impregnates Rowan with himself and becomes his lover's son, which is just like, whoa, I don't even know what to do with this sort of like incest themes that come up here. Although I suppose there is a little bit of like, the goddess would have the son lover, like that sort of, one of the older motifs of the goddesses and so on. But yeah, I think the gender dynamics are really interesting here because this is a matriarchal family that we're looking at, really. It's a lot of women in power. There's one man who was connected to Lasher in that way. We haven't learned too much about Julian in the show yet, but apparently there's some interesting stuff about his sexuality and queerness and so on. But, you know, you've got a lot of powerful women here. And in watching the second time through, I was also kind of noticing, like, what are the different powers that we see here?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting that Tessa's power is glamour, and I think it's specifically over men.
Mm-hmm.
So she has a power to, you know, hypnotize men in a way. And I feel like that's something that, yeah, maybe that's to a degree a real power. Like, you know, a lot of women have makeup as sort of a glamour, a power of illusion. Many women have learned or had to learn for survival reasons, like how to kind of manipulate men, to, you know, in certain ways. But I also loved that Cyprian's power is empathy. So Cyprian is part of the Talamasca, which again, is the Talamasca good or evil? That's not totally clear, right? You know, are there individual people within the Talamasca that are good and some of them are bad? And like, what is this organization even? But he's trying to help Rowan, and he's definitely very genuine in that and falls in love with her and so on. But his power is that he can touch something and remember its past, but also he feels so empathetically. And there was something quite satisfying about seeing a male with supernatural powers that aren't like, you know, he can smash things really well or like shoot lasers from his eyes, you know. It's like he actually has this incredible power of empathy where he can feel what's happened in the past, and he can feel people's feelings in this way. Like, I liked seeing a man with that type of power, right? So he's a witch, I guess, in his own way, though. I don't think they use that terminology in the show. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I feel like there's lots of interesting stuff going on with gender here. Mm-hmm. And also this idea of like, okay, are these women powerful because of themselves, or are they powerful because they're being empowered by a masculine power, which is Lasher? You know, and do they really need that? And even in season 2, there is this tension of like, does Rowan need him? Does she not need him? Like, is it, how much of it is in her head? Like, he has to be close by, but you know, how much of that power is hers and how much of it is his? And, you know, so I feel like there's lots of interesting stuff going on there. So yeah, that's a big ramble about it, but I was wondering your thoughts about that too.
Yeah, that topic of power and the way that it's explored all throughout the series, and then when I say that, the books, the show, is really fascinating. And yes, this is a family that for 300 years is a matriarchal line, which is, you know, very uncommon in our world, that the person who has the greatest power in the family is a woman. And yes, there is one male witch that is a very powerful witch, Julian, in the history. And then there is this other character who is Cyprian Greaves in the show. In the book, it's Michael Curry, who is actually the husband to Rowan. And he is this like kind-hearted, good man, like just this like loving heart. He's kind of like this angelic character that really feels. Whereas the others, including Rowan in the story, really struggle even within themselves. Like, am I good or am I bad? And what are these powers that I have? Because for those who don't know the series, Rowan is an extremely gifted healer. She's a neurosurgeon. She's a very, very gifted doctor, like brilliant doctor. And so she has this incredible power to heal, but she also has the power to kill. If she is angry, she can kind of, without touching someone, she can, you know, give them an embolism and like, you know, cause them to have a major hemorrhage in their brain or something. And so, and then when she joins forces with Lasher, her powers are enhanced, but she does have powers that are her own. And throughout the story, the history, that's part of the incest theme, actually, is that it's almost like Lasher is helping to create this bloodline, you know, and bringing people, different witches, men and women from different bloodlines throughout the 300 years to come together, and people within the family, you know, having children with each other in order to strengthen certain powers and then certain capacities. And I guess in that way, if we look at it like in real witchcraft, you have people who are practitioners who have their own innate powers. And then as they develop relationship with certain animist forces, those powers are strengthened. So I guess like that. But then I think always when working with power, like this is something that was definitely spoken a lot, studying Tantra, like the Tantrika is someone who works with power, and power is neutral. It can be good or bad. What depends is like, what are
Right.
your intentions? What are your desires? And that's the real work, is like being able to be ruthlessly honest with yourself about why you're wielding that power and what it is you want to get with it. That seems to make the difference. That it seems to, in this series, play with that idea that power itself is actually quite neutral, but people are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But people are not. Yeah. And I mean, I keep kind of coming back to this idea of good and evil. And of course, nobody's one or the other, right? Like that's a false binary too. Okay, so can we talk about some unanswered questions from the show, mysteries? I'm curious if you have insight, having read the books, or if you just sort of read it differently to me, because I just still have some curiosities that I'm trying to sort out.
Okay, let me see what I can do.
Okay, so first thing, Deirdre. Why? It seems to be Cortland who hired someone to kill Deirdre. Why?
So that's not in the book at all. Like that is, and Cortland is a totally different. He's not a total. He's a different character. Like he plays a different role in the show than in the book, to some degree. But that definitely doesn't happen in the book. It is only in the show. But from what I get in the show, why that happens is because Cortland wants to get on to the next witch, which is Rowan, which is the doorway, because it's trying to get to the prophecy. And
right.
It is truth that in the series, often Lasher, as soon as all his energy goes to the designee, but as soon as the new female baby is born, he'll often preference the baby and kind of neglect the mom or even not care. And there's Julian becomes a really important character in the story. And, Lasher basically says when a witch has fulfilled their purpose to him, he does not protect them anymore and will even cause them harm. So I think that's the theme they're working with.
Julian will.
That Lasher.
Okay, because
he lets Julian know, so Julian has to, in the books, he has to learn a way to stay useful to Lasher in order to stay alive. So that's how I read that or experienced that, was that, Cortland working in cahoots with Lasher. It's like Dierdre has served her purpose. She's no longer useful. And so let's get her out of the way so that Rowan can become the designee, because this is now the prophecy can be enacted.
Okay. Yeah, it is implied that Julian wanted Cortland to do it.
Yeah.
But I was confused about whether Lasher wanted that or not, because Lasher seemed really upset when Dierdre was killed. Like, I felt like that was a moment where you got a sense of his genuine love and care for the witches that he's connected to. And that he wanted to go to Rowan, but it didn't seem that she needed to die for that.
Yeah. Also in the book is this whole thing around Lasher's love. It's confusing to the witch, because it seems like he really loves him. He'll say that all the time, but I love you. And as the story, you realize like what he thinks of as love is like, I need you. It's not really love the way we would think of love. It's not like because he will cause harm to the witches, quite terrible harm to the witches. But he acts like he loves them. And even as he's harming them, he's like, but I love you. So actually there's a whole thing in the book that really plays with the themes of like abusive relationships, where there's this seductive attraction for the witch towards Lasher, and Lasher is both harming the witch, but then like loving them. And there are many scenes, especially later, as Lasher takes form and actually captures Rowan, and it says that are basically like playing out all the dynamics of really serious abuse dynamics, abuse relationships.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. There was that moment when I was thinking about just the gender dynamics when he and Rowan first kind of connect with each other, and they're in a thrall, I guess. Mm-hmm. And he's like, you want cake? And she's like, I don't want cake. What are you talking about? And he's like, but you do want cake. And it's like, why is he telling her what she wants? Like, that's a weird abusive dynamic, really, is just like telling someone how they feel, sort of gaslighting adjacent, right? And she's confused because she's like, maybe I do want cake. Like, it's just this moment of just like, what I don't know. Like, I'm confused by this. And often that is how an abusive relationship will go. And in season 2, this hasn't been like, it hasn't been sorted out yet. So I'm not sure this is such a spoiler, especially if you've seen the first one, but it's like Lasher is seeking out Mayfair women, and he seems to be like wanting to be close to them, and they smell so good to him, and they're into it. It's like this, it appears to be this consensual sexual thing that happens, but then they die. And it's not clear, like, did he become violent and kill them, or did they die because it was like a side effect of what was happening? Like, did he mean to? It seems like he didn't mean to do it, at least at first. But it's unclear, like, what's happening there. But I feel like from the abusive relationship perspective, that makes sense, right? It's like the love bombing and like, trust me, I'm your person, all of these things. And then the harm happening anyway, in this way that can be very confusing. That is actually pretty real for abusive relationships.
It's really real. And that exactly. So in the book, that's explained in more detail, because what he's actually doing, he wants to reproduce. But he's like a genetic mutation. Like there's a whole section on that. Like once he takes form in a human body, when she does, and they start to show that in season 2, he's a whole other race of being. But some of the Mayfair witches have the certain like chromosomal makeup that they might be able to reproduce with him, like Rowan does. And he's attracted to them by scent, and they're attracted to him by scent. So some of the more powerful witches actually smell him, like the pheromones of him, and they are intoxicated, and they go into this like rapturous state. And even though there's like a strange man approaching them, they experience this really intoxicated thing, and they have a sexual encounter with him, and it's both incredible and overwhelming. And then because his seed takes like it kind of like really rapidly starts to reproduce, and they have hemorrhages that are basically miscarriages. So that's what's killing them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that, it's pretty dark. Like it's heavy. But that dynamic of like they are intoxicated and they can't stop, even though sometimes they're like, I'm in pleasure, no, I'm in pain. There's actually like sex scenes where they're like, I can't tell what I'm feeling. Am I in the most incredible pleasure experience, or am I in pain? Am I dying? What's happening? I don't know. Like,
Wow. Wow, that's so powerful. Yeah. There's kind of a funny moment where they're all trying to figure out why Lasher wanted to become embodied. And that's the big mystery of season 2. And Rowan asks him at one point, and he just goes in to try to kiss her. And you're just like, did he become embodied so that he could just like that? Like, is that just what he wanted to do? And actually, it sounds like the answer is yes.
Yeah. It is
for reproductive reasons, but also like, like what's one thing you can't do if you don't have a body, right? Even though he's had these sexual, in a thrall type state, he's had sexual experiences with all of these women, but he hasn't really actually been embodied for that. And so, it's also maybe that, I guess just the way I was thinking about it is that sort of more existential question of like, what are we here for? What are we here to do? And lately my answer to the meaning of life is like, just to be in a body well. Not to be well in a body necessarily, because that's a different thing, but to be in a body in a way where like it's as far as we know, this is the only time where our bodies get to experience things, right? And so, good food, good company, laughter, sex, like these are the things that we're here for. And so you think about somebody like Carlotta, who, from that whole perspective, the sexual repression, all of that stuff, you go through your whole life trying to resist something that's so natural for you. So it's interesting that this show that'll be interesting to see how they continue to play with that, because the sexual repression is obviously a harm from Anne Rice's perspective. And also the sex is a harm too, in the same vein, right? Which is like, that's truthful as well. Like that's definitely, sex can be both, right?
Both. And you've just spoken to like, that's a core theme, is this idea that Lasher, when he's a disembodied spirit, he wants so badly to be in a body to be able to experience, again, kind of like tantric philosophy, right? Like why do we form so that we can experience? And it's funny that you said like laughter. When he's a disembodied spirit, he'll say laughter because he can't laugh. And that's the thing he wants the most. He wants to be able to feel laughter, and he wants to dance, and he wants to make love, and he wants to like feel the ground in his feet. So he longs to be embodied. And so she's really playing with that theme that many disembodied beings would long to have the human experience. And then, yes, I love that exploration of how the repression of what is, and the denial of what is so natural, right? And the pain that causes, but then also the overindulgence or the distortion of these natural things is also can become really dark and terrible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're making me think too of, in our last podcast, you told the story of the shade of Achilles, who would rather, be a slave for a poor man and feel the sun on his face than be the king of the underworld. I feel like that's that same lesson, right? It's like, yeah, we can seek for these big things like power and money and whatever it is, but ultimately, the only thing we know about this life is this is when we have a body that can experience things. And life can be painful and pleasurable and sometimes both at the same time. Like, that's very real, so I love that existential answer to that question.
You probably have clients that they're just longing to know how to feel. And that's the big work. It's like, and just that ability to feel immense joy or immense pain is so huge. And so that's it. I love that you said to be in a body well, which to me means being able to be with these experiences of living, which are not always easy. That's really the work.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but, from a witchy healing perspective, as many people who might be listening to this know, I have quite a history with going through miscarriages. And I think one of the things that really helped was actually doing some ancestral work on the ungrieved babies in my family line, and being in these experiences through a modality called family constellations, which, I've been finding really interesting and quite magical, actually.
It is. Quite
somatic and magical. Yeah. But through that, having these experiences where I could grieve what was ungrieved. And I mean, I don't know, but it felt like there was a way that was something that needed to happen before that energy or that pattern could clear from my life. And that sounds like what you're talking about, is like these disembodied beings that needed to be remembered and loved, and, the grievers as well as the grieved, like the lost babies, but also the mothers that at that time, couldn't talk about it or didn't, what would you have done, if you had a stillbirth or something in the middle of a war or, a plague or something else going on? There's so much more space in this generation for us to sit with our feelings than maybe ever before. And so that feels like a magic that we have maybe a responsibility to be exploring.
I love that idea that, we're downstream from so much, and that part of the privilege of living in this time is also the responsibility of feeling what couldn't be felt for our ancestors.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so unanswered question. I don't think this was in the book, but why do you think we had Odette, Cyprian's sister, who was a surrogate, and it was this whole side plot about she's pregnant, it's not her baby. There's so much about pregnancy and fertility and stuff in the story, and you're like, what is Odette doing here? What is the point of this?
That's where some of my biggest unanswered questions are too, and I was curious how they're going to bring that together, because again, rereading the books, it's amazing how they're she's tackling the topic of abortion. And I did a lot that led me to want to research and understand more about where Ehrenreich stood on that topic. And I found different things. And then how that plays into what's happening right now, especially in America, but in many places around the topic of reproductive rights. And so I was really intrigued and curious about how they're portraying that, because they haven't spoken to the whole abortion theme, which is actually a big part of the story. And then they bring in, that surrogate, which I'm like, okay, this is part of that, but I don't understand what point they're making here. I'm very unclear about that and where they're actually standing and what's guiding their choices about how they're approaching that topic, which is really at the heart of the books as well. I don't know.
Yeah, towards the end, they were like, "Oh, if she's lactating,
that was weird.
We can bring her and she can nurse Lasher," and then it just never came back. And we know.
That's just weird.
I mean, maybe they'll return to it, but it was a weird.
Yeah. Okay. I also was like, what is that about? And what story is being pulled through? Whose agenda is being?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we'll see if that comes back. Because, yeah, surrogate as opposed to, yeah, there's something about that.
Yeah.
Another sort of unanswered question, I guess, is like Lasher has some
Yeah.
powers that he can do things. Like he pulls Deirdre back from
Yeah.
jumping off the balcony. Why didn't he pull Antha back? Like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know. Like it's kind of confusing to me how he seems to have some he could light fires. Like there are certain things that he can do,
Mhm.
but other things he can't. So I was a little confused about like what is his power
Yeah, well,
exactly.
in the book they explore that too. That so he does have certain powers and ability to enact change on the material world, but it takes a lot of his energy. So he can only do it sometimes, and he gets a lot of that power from the
uh
witches. So sometimes he can move things or do things, but then it exhausts him, and he can't do it at other times. And then that's a whole part of the story is sometimes he moves to protect one of the witches or to benefit them, and other times he purposely allows them to be harmed because, as again, they've served their purpose. They're no longer useful.
he has a different
He has a
agenda
different
or whatever it
agenda
might
and he
be. Yeah,
doesn't
okay.
care anymore. And that kind
I
of like
see.
they
Okay.
showed that really in a way, like how he didn't come to protect Tessa because it actually served his purpose.
That was another one of my
Yeah,
questions. Why after that ceremony and
yeah,
it seemed like he chose Tessa, she chose
yeah,
him, like Rowan barfed up the
yeah,
key. Like it seemed like it was the ceremony
yeah,
worked, but then he go to Tessa at all and didn't help her when
yeah,
she actually was harmed by those incel
yeah.
people. Like what's your read on why he didn't go to her? He just wasn't interested in Tessa or
No, I think that exactly because that's a theme in the book that actually he can be quite evil in a way, in that way, because it actually served his purpose better to use Tessa to get Rowan to end up showing up to
get
save
back to
her and
Rowan?
then really like claim her power. And he didn't think anything of sacrificing Tessa, basically. She was a sacrifice.
Got
Yeah,
it. Got it. Because Rowan was the 13th witch. Tessa couldn't have been the 13th witch,
yeah,
I guess.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense.
yeah,
Okay. So just another
yeah.
random question. Okay, so when we first meet Suzanne, she's
Uh-huh.
picking herbs with her sister, and there's this guy that appears and she just gives him this hand job. Why? Who is he? What was that? Do you know?
That was so disturbing to me and so confusing. It was one of the like I said, there's a number of things that were just like confusing and strange to me, and that was I did not enjoy that moment at all. And then that
No.
he's ends up being one of the ones that is like calling her to be burned, right? Like he's one of those guys that's there in the square. Um, is he even the
And
father?
it's implied that he's going to take her little sister and do the same thing to her.
Yeah. So I mean, I just see that as like I don't know, just gross. And also there's so much truth in it because that was so much a part of the witch burnings, right? This like painting the witches as these over sexualized creatures, but then so much of the sexual violence that was enacted on the real women was done at the hands of the inquisitors and and just horrific. So I think it was just like consciously weaving that theme in that which it was is disturbing and hard to witness, and that was really difficult. Yeah, but it showed
Yeah.
like kind
Yeah, I think theme wise it makes sense
of
like
yeah,
that she's someone who's
yeah.
vulnerable in these ways and he must have had something over her. I feel like it would have helped
I
plot
know,
wise for him to say like do this or else I'll
I know.
whatever.
Yeah,
Because there was a sense of like why is she doing this? Like
yeah,
what's happening here?
yeah,
But that's true that yeah, the women would have been some of the women that were persecuted were the ones that didn't want to have sex with a certain guy or like didn't care to get remarried after they were widowed or in some way sexually rejected a man.
yeah, yeah. That
Yeah.
theme of sexual rejection, what that does, the violence that it can bring out in men.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So obviously there's a lot here.
Love it.
Is there anything else that you want to bring up like from the show or
No,
any questions that you have? I mean, I feel like you have more answers than I do, but
no, that was great.
yeah.
I love that conversation. No, I really enjoyed that. That was awesome. I can't wait to share more.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much for coming and doing Witches on
Mm.
Witches with me. I feel like maybe we can do it again with Agatha all along or one of these other ones.
Anytime.
Because that one was great too.
Yeah.
So that was a wonderful conversation. I always love talking with you about this stuff. We went in so many interesting directions.
Thank you.
Thanks for being willing to watch some horror with me.
It's really hard part of watching the horror, but it's so worth it. I love it. I'm like, I've got to do this. It's so worth it. Great conversation. It's really great food for thought. So it's given me a lot that I've been contemplating in the last month on all of these topics. So thank you very much for that.
So as always, thank you so much for listening to Popcorn Therapy. I hoped you enjoyed that Witches on Witches. And if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have comments, depending on where you're listening, you can leave a comment on the episode. You can get in touch with me via my website, which is juliepeters.ca. I'm on Instagram at juliepeterswellness and on TikTok at Popcorn Therapy. Natalie Rousseau is also natalierousseau.com. I will link her information in the show notes as well. It's very helpful to me if you share these episodes, if you subscribe, if you follow, do all of the clicky things. That just helps more people to be able to find the show. And I really appreciate your listening. I would love your thoughts and comments. Please don't hunt me down and steal my heart and kill me as a witch. I'm really hoping that doesn't happen for any of you listening. Thanks for being kind. And I will catch you up next time we have Popcorn Therapy. Thanks for listening.